talk about Yemen, where we have a new estimate from the UN. It warns that war deaths will reach 377,000 by the end of the year. So that's just a couple months from now, and that means we're at probably what 350 or so thousand at this point by this estimate. As Dave DeCamp mentioned on the last episode of the show, we really didn't get in and talk about the numbers or anything, which I wanted to do on this show, but he did say that he thought this was the low end estimate, and I completely agree. If anybody is curious as to really why, I would one of the recommendations I would have to make is to go back and listen to episodes of Scott Horton interview Nasser Arabi, and then Andrew Coburn's writing on this for Harper's Magazine. And so those two sources really point to you and help you understand. Oh, as well as Martha Mundy's study, I think with Tufts University, on the food war the Saudis are waging in Yemen. Those three things will really explain how terrible the situation is in Yemen. But even this 377,000 number is really bad, because 60% of those deaths have not been a result of bombs being dropped and killing people, but rather hunger and preventable diseases. And that means very expectedly that 70% of those kills are killed in Yemen. So 70% of the 377,000 are children under the age of 5. So this isn't a situation where even the men are being rounded up and killed, or it's just the fighters that are being killed. This is an entire generation of Yemeni children being disappeared from the planet in the most cruel and unbelievable way. Now, at the beginning of this year, in 2021, the UN predicted that 400,000 Yemeni children under the age of 5 would, succumb from starvation or something like that, preventable disease. And I had always mentioned that, while that number was startling, that it might be a high estimate, but at the same time, even if it's a fraction of true, is absolutely horrific and unbelievable, and something that the U.S. should not be a part of. And we'll get into how the U.S. is a part of the war in Yemen in a second. But the idea here that we only have 377,000 total dead from the start of the war in 2015, when the UN was previously saying 400,000 this year. I think, we need to get some real answers from the UN and try to understand what's going on. They made some predictions that I don't know if they're exactly correct in this study as well, saying that 1.3 million would die by 2030 if the war continues. I mean, it just depends on how the war continues, right? And like where people go, what happens. There's so much environmental stuff that could go on in the process of those 5 years. But this has bombed the Yemeni people bad. This has destroyed an entire generation and probably more of Yemen. There's going to be people living in poverty, extreme poverty, not being able to eat, picking through garbage kind of poverty for decades to come because of this war. So that's how horrible it is. Now let's talk about what's actually happening. The Saudis are bombing the Yemeni capital of Sanaa pretty frequently in the past couple of weeks. Prior to maybe the past, month or so, a lot of the Saudi strikes were being targeted at central Yemen in the city of Marib. This is an area that is at least reported in the international press, and depending on who you talk to from Yemen, one of the more valuable economic areas of the country, and maybe more importantly, one of the traditionally North Yemeni cities. And so the Houthis taking this city would generally somewhat put the lines currently between the Houthis and the Saudis equivalent to Yemen pre-1990, when you had North and South Yemen. And so there's been a ton of airstrikes targeted at that area of Yemen, Marib. But the Saudis have also started to target the capital city of Sanaa, and which they have throughout the war. But recently, and this provoked the Houthis to carry out drone attacks against Saudi cities or Saudi oil facilities. As far as I could tell, the Houthis have not had any strikes in Saudi do any actual damage or kill anybody very recently. There have been instances like in September of 2019 where they hit the Aramco facility and did a lot of damage. But at this point, either the Houthi technology just isn't there to carry out these kind of attacks all the time. They're forced to use dumb ballistic missiles, unguided things, or maybe it's the Saudi air defenses that are interfering and preventing these attacks from happening or from actually striking home. But either way, this prevents there being any consequences for the Saudis for their brutal bombing campaign in Yemen. We have more strikes in Yemen. I think this was last weekend when there was a flurry of strikes against the city. They claim that they're targeting tunnels beneath the presidential palace, but even if there are weapons in the tunnel beneath the presidential palace, you're probably hitting civilian targets or at least scaring civilians and hitting very close to civilian structures when you're bombing near them. Even if the president had like a nuclear weapon in the tunnel under the White House or something like that, dropping a bomb on Pennsylvania Avenue would absolutely, do a bunch of damage to civilians. And so understand that this is likely the case in Yemen. Also, the Saudis' intelligence in Yemen has been very poor, or just deliberately, they claim, we meant to hit the missile facility, but we actually hit the food factory or whatever. And it could be that they intend to hit the food factory, and it's not bad intelligence; it's just lying. There have also been, this is just from December 3rd, so 2 days ago, Jason Diss reported Saudi Arabia had killed 90 Houthis in strikes in the Marib province. For a long time, I was very skeptical of all these reports that Saudi Arabia was claiming to kill 100, 200 Houthis. But then the Houthis came out and said 15,000 of their fighters have been killed since June. And so it seems pretty believable, I guess, that all these people are actually being killed by Saudi airstrikes, and the Saudis are inflating that number. A story that I had talked about on the show about a month ago was Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Arab nations cutting all ties with Lebanon, which is in the middle of a pretty severe economic crisis right now. There's people really struggling. There's not power all the time in that country. And this was a major blow, having the Saudis and other countries cut trade ties with them. And this was over Lebanon appointing a foreign minister who had in the past made mild criticisms of the Saudi war in Yemen. And this again resulted in the destruction of relationships between Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. And then this Lebanese information minister ends up stepping down. And then Saudi Arabia holds a call with Lebanon's prime minister, in which the prime minister called an important step in, is putting the Saudi Lebanese relationship back on the right path. And this is one of those things that had Iran done something like this, had China done something like this, the US would be all up in arms. It would be threatening sanctions, or actually probably had sanctioned Saudi Arabia. How dare you try to manipulate, cut ties with another country to get them to back off a position over the Yemen war. This is like something that China would do because a country has an airport with the Taiwanese flag instead of a Chinese flag or something like that. I don't even know if China would go that far over something like that. And, this is a mild criticism of the war that Saudi Arabia blew into cutting relations with Lebanon over. The U.S. would definitely be taking action had any other country done this. And I think rolls into the idea that the U.S. is going to have this great summit of democracies where we're going to sanction Russia and China for being human rights violators. And the fact that the U.S. supports more dictatorships and unfree countries than the Russians and the Chinese do. All right, so there was a pretty good story here in The Guardian detailing how Saudi Arabia was able to reverse the vote of a UN Human Rights Council resolution or investigation into war crimes in Yemen. And so the U.S. hasn't been part of the Human Rights Council for the UN for quite some time. Trump left, I think, pretty soon after he took office. But one of the things that the Human Rights Council did is had an investigation into war crimes in Yemen. And of course, it was going to find that Saudi Arabia had been doing unbelievably cruel things with the backing of the U.S. and everyone else. And so, in the past, that they had tried to get this resolution undone and were unable to. But then they were able to swing it this past year and add, I think, 9 no votes to kill this investigation. And a couple ways that this was done was by bribing or threatening other countries. Senegal got a visit with the UAE. Which country is it? One country, Togo, got to open a embassy in Riyadh, and Riyadh guaranteed to make promises to Togo for more help with counterterrorism missions, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And then also, the Saudis threatened Indonesia and said, hey, we're not going to accept your COVID passports for anybody who wants to make the pilgrimage to Mecca unless you vote no on this. And so, the Saudis are, leveraging the fact that they have this very critical piece of Islam to kill other Muslims is one of the more unbelievable things that's highlighted in this article. But unsurprising, and the Saudis don't care about religion. I think this is all operated out of Mohammed bin Salman's greed, and so they were able to, again, switch these votes, kill a Human Rights Council investigation. And, while I'm not like a big international law guy or anything like that, this investigation could give people who are against the Yemen war more ammunition, more information to be able to say, look, even the Human Rights Council determined that Saudi Arabia is doing these unbelievably evil things. All right, one more story on Yemen, and that is France is making a massive arms sale to the UAE, which is a key Saudi ally in this war. 80 fighter jets and 12 military helicopters for $20 billion. And you do have to wonder a little bit, too, with what's happened recently. France getting cut out of a submarine deal with Australia due to the AUKUS agreement, and the U.S. planning to sell the Saudis, or the Australians, nuclear powered submarines instead of the French conventionally powered submarines. If this maybe wasn't something in some way facilitated or encouraged by the U.S. to help recruit the French military industrial complex after its loss on the Australian deal. One talk